Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are now joined by Steve Gesell. He is the Chief of Police in San Luis Obispo, and he has brought today Derek Johnson, who's the Community Development Director in San Luis Obispo as well. And I'm surprised that we'll be talking about homelessness. As you know, San Luis Obispo has been deemed the happiest place in North America. I recently spoke with Jan Marks. You have about 98% of the people that are satisfied with San Luis Obispo. Of course, she is the mayor of this city. But in a recent community survey, it found that the point of concern at the highest level is homelessness. San Luis Obispo residents are concerned about the homeless. Why is that?
Absolutely, and again, it's a pleasure to be here, Brad.
Please.
Homeless, as you said, is a top concern in our community, the homeless population. I've been the chief since January of this year, and this has clearly been the top issue in the community and top issue for me personally.
And there's been a lot of consternation. I know back in February there had been some arrests of people who were, was it sleeping in their cars? And so that caused some concern. Was that the right approach? The city council adopted a different approach based upon one that came out of Santa Barbara, from where you had resided for many years.
Yeah, there was a model down in Santa Barbara County that was a partnership between the city of Santa Barbara and the county, where they developed a safe parking program. And that program is really designed to help people transition out of homelessness into a vehicle and hopefully into a job and permanent housing.
And the Prado Day program has been successful at some level, not a lot of parking spaces available. But what's interesting about that program is that in order to participate, the homeless individuals need to agree to engage in services. And that's really why we're here today, to talk about the homeless population. Because I think it's fair to say that individuals don't have a real sense of who the homeless are. They may have one view, but it really is very different from that. Derek, why don't you talk to us about the homeless population in San Luis Obispo, which I believe is probably a microcosm of homelessness generally.
You know, in San Luis Obispo, we really thought about a model for and to help the public really understand the homeless population in our community. And through a collaborative effort with nonprofits and the county social service providers, we really come to the conclusion that there are really three segments of the homeless population. We have the ready or the want tos. Those are individuals who want to access services, are in a position where they're ready to sustain and engage in changes in their lives.
People, for example, that will participate in the Prado parking program.
Ready to participate in the Prado program, willing to be engaged with a case manager to work on goals and steps to transition away from homelessness.
But what's so interesting, Derek and Chief Gesell, is that I think people wouldn't realize that only 20% of the homeless population can be classified as, quote, ready.
And that's based upon information we've received from the service providers. A small segment is actually engaged in case management and has actually enrolled in programs to make those positive changes, to look on workforce and training.
Chief, does that surprise you that such a small number are interested in services, only 20%?
You know, it's absolutely been an educational experience for me over the last 10 months. And initially, yeah, that did come as a surprise. And I believe, generally speaking, and we've made some significant strides in our community and some very effective dialogue throughout the business community, neighborhoods, and taking really this message out there. And what we found is the general public, still at this point, we believe the majority of the public thinks that the vast majority of the homeless population is this 20%.
And it's not.
And it is not.
And we know that it's important for law enforcement to get a handle on this issue because, as I understand it, the majority of at least your daytime arrests focus upon the homeless. It's not that you're seeking to cause trouble for them, but that's where you're being called, is homeless being involved in nefarious activity, allegedly.
Absolutely, Brad. In our daytime period, which we classify 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., around 30% of our calls for service are transient related.
So it's a plurality at a certain
disturbing,
level.
absolutely.
So let's go to the second population, and that is one that is classified as unable. And that's a pretty big number.
Yeah, roughly 40% of the homeless population, we believe, is unable, and those are individuals that, be due to mental or various different types of dependencies, can't access services, unable to sustain enrollment in services, so they're not really in a position to make the meaningful changes in their lives.
So, but what do you do with those folks? I mean, do these people need to be, and I don't use this term pejoratively, institutionalized?
Well, this is really where the collaborative effort has really seen some strides, and where we've been working with the county to bring additional resources to the table. And that's in the form of caseworkers and additional programs that we eventually want to consolidate in a homeless services center.
Now, here's a population I think is probably frustrating for both of you, and that is the last 40% resistant. So they could access services, but they're not. They don't want to.
In this particular population, this is probably the population that the common public person has kind of interaction with. Mm-hmm. They're down in downtown San Luis Obispo, various different parts of the city, engaged in panhandling. They may have had some different type of interaction with them, and that's maybe been negative. And that's one where the social service providers and law enforcement really struggle to make some change.
And as I understand it, Chief, a lot of these folks, whether they're ready, unable, or resistant, are not native to San Luis Obispo.
That's correct. Another misconception, common misconception, is that the majority of our homeless population is indigenous, or they're residents of San Luis Obispo or San Luis Obispo County. And what we know now is approximately 70% of those that draw police contact, primarily in this last group that we call the resistant group, 70% of those have recently arrived here.
From where? And why do they? I mean, there are certain communities, I don't mean to cast aspersions, but Santa Monica, for example, I mean, it's known to be, sure. I mean, homeless are welcome. And it's not that San Luis Obispo is hostile to homeless, but I don't know it to be a location that is welcoming a homeless population.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Brad, they're coming from all over the United States.
But why San Luis Obispo, do we know?
Well, I think San Luis Obispo is one of the multiple cities in the state of California that may be seen as receptive to certain lifestyles and supporting certain lifestyles. And I think every individual has a different reason for coming. I think the more important factor is to get the information out that they are coming, and it's absolutely a strain on the community, any community, particularly one of resident population of 45,000. It really strains city resources and the community as well.
So, Derek, let's talk about this resistant population, because I know you provide us with these graphs. Your goal is to decrease the size of the resistant population. You can't do much about unable, although you probably could, but you're working toward it. But resistant is obviously the first target.
Well, we really, right now, our focus is, what can we do about actually the unable population?
Oh, really?
Because our sense is that we can have somewhat of a dent on that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right, because if you're resistant, you're fighting it. But if you're unable, but can get them to able, maybe they'll join ready.
And that's caseworkers who can work with them on either medication, through case management, and get them to a point where they can sustain and engage in services that result in meaningful, long-lasting change. The resistant population, that is one where really we have found that if it is individuals who are coming from outside the area, the way to impact that population, a lot of time the way for someone who's in the resistant population to have actual change is to bring them back to the community where they came from. Mm-hmm. If they have a social support system, if they have a network of care, they're more likely to understand and engage in some side of change.
I have to ask both of you, what should we do wherever we may be if we encounter someone who is homeless? I'm not saying that they're approaching us in a violent way, but I'm always kind of flummoxed. I don't know what to say. Should I give them $1? Should I what do I do?
Well, that's a personal choice, Brad, and I can tell you we have a huge concern with panhandling in our downtown area. Our merchants have struggled with this issue for years, and this is another example of the collaboration that goes on in this particular community of San Luis Obispo, a very invested city.
But I have heard that giving them $1 is not the right thing. It's not a wise thing to do.
And that's the point I want to make, is what other cities have done, and the direction we'd like to see San Luis Obispo go is, when you give that money to the panhandler, you have no idea where it's going. And generally speaking, the consensus is that most of these are the resistant population that are down there. So what we would suggest is, if you really want to give to the organizations where you know your money is going to make a difference.
Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. My name is Brad Pomerance. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Chris Unger. He is on the school board at San Luis Coastal Unified School District. We'll be right back.